Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. At least it's evening in England. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce an old friend, Tim Wyatt. Tim is an esoteric writer, a lecturer, researcher, and organizer. Also, a broadcast and print journalist for half a century. He has won awards for his plays and TV documentaries. Tim has produced numerous TV films and currently writes for various esoteric publications worldwide. He is the author of more than 50 books, including Cycles of Eternity, an overview of the ageless wisdom distributed to more than 40 countries. As an international lecturer for the Theosophical Society and other organizations, Tim travels widely across Europe, and he is the founder of the School of Applied Wisdom based in Leeds, and also helps to run Leeds Theosophical Society. Tim Wyatt has been a lifelong student of esoteric ideas and occult science, and is a dedicated explorer of consciousness. He is a lover of the natural world and lives in the Yorkshire Pennines, and he lives with Electra, and Electra is his cat. Over to Tim.
Thank you very much, Eddie, for those very kind words, and welcome everybody wherever you are around the world. It seems we have participants from many different corners of the globe, so this is all new to us. Well, it's certainly new to me, but it's very exciting. I think it opens up all sorts of possibilities. And I think what the current situation also does gives us an opportunity of doing a number of things. Given the huge numbers of people who are suffering so terribly, people who are dying, it gives us an opportunity to study what death is. And it also gives us an opportunity, I think, to look at other aspects, not the exoteric outward effects of all this, but the deeper esoteric causes behind this particular pandemic. And I think it also gives the opportunity to look at another influence which is often neglected, which is that of cycles, because cycles and karma and reincarnation are all inextricably tied together in various ways. Now, as I say, we've seen the outward effects of this and how this virus in a period of weeks has done more to change people's consciousness and behavior to some extent, well, to a large extent, than any other single factor I can certainly remember in my life. And we're running out of cliches now to describe the far-reaching effects of this. These effects are tumultuous, and I'll be dealing in some depth with more aspects of this in a talk that I'll be doing hopefully next month. This is about the turning point of a particular cycle. I would say just briefly that it's my opinion, and indeed other people's opinions, that this is part of a series of tumultuous climaxes and changes which have occurred particularly over the course of my lifetime, over the last 6.5 decades. We live in a world now which I describe as one of perma-change, where sometimes changes are happening more quickly in a matter of weeks and months than happened previously in decades or centuries, particularly technological change. We're all facing a huge economic aftershock out of this, and it may well be that far more people die through indirect causes of this, through hunger and other things possibly we can't even imagine, than will die from the actual disease itself. In terms of the cycle, it's perhaps no coincidence, because there really is no such thing as coincidence, that it's almost exactly a century since the last global pandemic, which had a major impact on humanity, which was, of course, the Spanish flu, which accompanied the end of the First World War, and was exacerbated because of the large movements of people. The world today is far more intimately interconnected in every single way than it was at that time. And I think the pandemic has made a lot of people realize how interconnected we actually are, not just through the internet, not just through air travel and other means of physically getting together, but the way that we've created cyberspace, we've created the internet, which has formed almost another body of the earth in its own way. It's almost like a kind of a secondary artificially created etheric body of the earth in which we can all do what we're doing exactly now. Now, in terms of what has happened to the world, it unfolded very, very quickly. And the debate goes on as to what the source of this particular outbreak was, whether it was from a lab in Wuhan in China, or the CIA, or aliens, or 7-foot lizards, or whatever it happens to be. But we're not really concerned with that. What we're concerned with is what has prompted something like this to be visited upon the world. What events did we collectively, as human beings, set in place to make this happen? Now, when we're dealing with karma, it's extremely difficult to disentangle our own personal karma. We don't know to any great extent, most of us don't know to any great extent, anything much about our past lives, but we accept the fact as Theosophists that our present lives are shaped by our actions, our thoughts, words, and deeds in previous lives, just as we are shaping our future lives now. That in itself is difficult enough, although the law of karma itself is extremely simple. For every effect, there is a cause, and every cause produces an effect. But trying to disentangle all this sort of stuff is extremely challenging. And when we come to collective karma, and everything has collective karma of one sort or another, families have karma, the Theosophical Society has karma, Manchester United Football Club has karma, Britain has karma, the world has karma. Given that this is a global event, it strikes me that this is a supreme instance of collective karma in action. It may be that the causes of this go back very, very deeply. We're often told, and we often explore this idea that what happened many tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago in that previous development stage of humanity, the fourth root race, the Atlantean times, when humanity seems to have bifurcated into two distinct streams. The lords of the shining face, the people who practiced good white magic, and the lords of the dark face who tried to manipulate matter and do all the things to nature that we are actually also doing now. We seem to be repeating the things that happened in Atlantean times. Some of the things that happened then are said to have been so powerful and have created such long-lasting thought forms that those still operate on the world today. And this constant interplay between the forces of light and darkness. What do I mean by the forces of light and darkness? Because I don't want to sound too biblical about this, but the forces of light are the pro-evolutionary forces who want this plan, which exists for humanity and for everything else, to unfold and for human beings to be able to evolve and reach a higher stage of development. The forces of darkness are the ones who want to keep humanity, for their own reasons, mired in the world of materialism, the physical world, with all its limitations, because it's this adherence to the physical world which has led to a lot of the conventional problems which we face on Earth today: resource depletion, pollution, greed, massive inequities in wealth and opportunity, and all the other evils that come out of it, all the glamours that materialism produces. We make TV programs about billionaires and all their overspending. We kind of worship mammon in a way that we never did in the past, although human beings have always been greedy and wanting to acquire more wealth. But it's now come to a stage And it struck me, and this may be a wild, wild fantasy, but is this being visited on us to show us certain things about our attitude to materialism? It's shown a lot of people that they don't need a lot of the things that they believe they need. And it's also going to change people's attitudes, because they'll no longer be as willing to go out and do jobs they don't like, to buy stuff they don't need, to impress people they also don't like. And so the fact that people are now physically being challenged about that materialism, I think is very significant. So could COVID-19 be something that's disguised as a wolf, but is in fact a sheep? Could it be something which will ultimately, despite all the carnage and destruction and death and tragedy it's brought in its wake, could it be something which is possibly a very beneficial thing for humanity? Will it order some kind of major rethink of who we are and what we do? I certainly hope that it's bringing a different attitude to death. I don't think this will be particularly widespread, but I do think it will be incremental. And I spent the last 3 or 4 years writing a book about death. I'm not here to publicize that right now, but the point is that in my researches, I found that people's attitudes to death have shifted significantly over the last 30 years. A lot of people's attitudes are, of course, shaped by the mainstream religions in the West. Obviously, the Eastern religions of Buddhism and Hinduism embody principles of reincarnation or rebirth of some kind, but the Western religions don't. And the modern pervasive religion, which is science, certainly doesn't talk about things like reincarnation, although over the past 40 or 50 years, a great deal of research has been done into this, and also into things like near-death experiences, out-of-the-body experiences, and other phenomena. And therefore, it seems to me that the attitude that many people have about reincarnation has changed. If you'd asked people when I was born in 1952 about reincarnation, it would have been the sole preserve of a few people interested in Eastern religions, Theosophists, and a few others. By and large, it was absolutely outside the mainstream of thought. Whereas now, when they do reliable surveys in the West, and particularly America, which was formerly a very religious country, they find that between a quarter and a third of people are now reporting that they believe in some kind of rebirth or reincarnation. And curiously enough, in some surveys, it shows more people actually believing in reincarnation than in God. So perhaps this is some kind of progress, I don't know. So attitudes have shifted significantly, but nevertheless, the world is still largely controlled by a mindset that says there is only the physical world. We only have our 5 very limited physical senses in which to perceive that world. And if we measure everything against that, then we get a very distorted and limited picture of reality. So talking about rebirth and the interlocking principle which goes with it of karma is, I think, a very, very important one. And karma is something which people generally understand. I think it came into the mainstream probably during the 1960s, during the psychedelic era and the Beatles and all that sort of stuff. People started then beginning to absorb in a much larger way ideas from Eastern mysticism and alternatives to the prevailing view at the time. And therefore, people do tend to have a rather simplistic and literal notion of karma, which is no bad thing, but it's much more subtle than that. But if you actually take the implications of karma to their logical extreme, it really challenges in a major way a lot of the assumptions we have, because it means there is no such thing as chance or luck or coincidence or these kinds of things. Nothing happens by accident. There is some cause to everything, whether we can see this or not. And sometimes notions of karma make people very angry. Because one of the things, if you believe in karma, if you really believe that this is a cosmic law operating throughout the universe and it affects us and everybody else, then it means there are no real victims in the world. And this is something which is very, very hard for people to understand, particularly people from my profession, because one of the things that journalism does these days is to either find victims, and if it can't find them, then it will create them, because victims are sexy in a strange, perverted sort of way. But really, there aren't any victims. I did a talk in Scotland last autumn, and I was talking about a similar subject of reincarnation and karma. And I quoted someone as saying that it was his idea that the people who perished in particular massacres or who were exterminated en masse in some way had maybe participated in these things themselves at earlier times. The example quoted was that people in the Spanish Civil War who perished had been those very people, the conquistadors, who'd caused so much damage and destruction and mass killing of the native peoples of Central and South America. And one man in the audience got extremely angry about this and started saying, well, you're just blaming the victims. And this is not the case. I mean, it doesn't mean to say we shouldn't show compassion to people. Of course we should. But this idea that people are somehow hapless victims is an attitude which is poisoning humanity. Because we all know as spiritual people, we rise and fall through our own efforts. Yes, we can seek assistance from other people, and we should offer assistance. But by and large, this is down to developing a sense of self-reliance and a sense of being able to shape our own destiny in some way, rather than allowing some invisible or angry God or the creeds of particular religions to dictate these things for us. And notions of reincarnation have now gone beyond mere religion, and they're in the realms of science and philosophy. And certainly there has been a lot of evidence, as I mentioned earlier on, particularly from things like wounds and marks on young children. And some of these have been checked by people like Ian Stevenson and many other researchers. And they have found that in many cases, when people have got neck wounds or marks, these correspond to knife wounds or bullet wounds and all sorts of other things. There's been a lot of work done in recent times in hypnotic regression and taking people back to other lives. And I think this is interesting, but of course, none of these things, and there are many, many different strands to all this, none of this provides conclusive proof. It simply offers evidence which we can accept or reject at will. But there is a powerful momentum building now amongst people. And I think it's getting stronger as each year goes by, that we're not just born here in one life, because people see the complete illogicality of that. What would be the purpose? If our main purpose is to evolve and to eventually transcend the human kingdom, what would be the purpose of living a single life on Earth, particularly if you only live for a few days or months or very few years? What can you possibly hope to achieve during that time? Life is a cumulative process. We build it up through accretion by building up layers. We talk about it often as like a spiral, which goes up and up and up, and we emerge each time, hopefully, slightly higher up that spiral, having benefited from the often painful lessons that we have to learn. And this COVID-19 virus is a very painful lesson for many people to learn. There can't really be anybody on Earth, except possibly people on very far-flung islands in the middle of the Pacific, and possibly not even there, who can't have been affected by this in some way. There is no event on Earth, however big it's been before, which has affected absolutely everybody in this way. And therefore we have to look on it in a different way from the way we would look on other events which are much more isolated in some ways. We can look on this as an opportunity, and to some people that's going to seem vaguely sick to say this, but there are opportunities, and many opportunities have emerged from this. People have said all kinds of different things. Oh, I can hear birdsong in my garden for the first time. I've had time to think about my life and to plan about it, and to consider myself rather than just this endless cycle of getting up, going to work, coming home, feeding the children, doing whatever you do in the evenings, and this repetitive cycle. It's challenged a lot of people who are already isolated, and one has a lot of sympathy with those people, because isolation is something which I think is a very, very dangerous thing for us all. And certainly in England, there is emerging evidence that more people have died during this, not from COVID-19 or related symptoms, but for rather mysterious causes. Are people dying because they simply do feel so isolated? We won't know until they start to crunch all the numbers on this, but it's something that we should definitely think about, because apart from anything else, it does show this intimate interconnectedness of humanity. We've always been interconnected. We've always had a collective mental body and all the rest of it. But now, for the first time, people are beginning to see what that connection can really be. And I do suspect that on the most basic level that you would define spirituality, people are starting to ask bigger questions about themselves and about the world. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing? What is the purpose of all this? And clearly, a lot of people do feel that life is meaningless and without any logic or purpose or continuum. And this is why possibly the most important thing that humanity has to learn at the moment is that there is a continuity of existence, that we do come in and out of physical bodies again and again and again. We have short and brutal lives, we have long and fulfilling lives, we have lives that are in between, we have lives that are boring, lives that are interesting. But as we progress, we can make those lives more interesting because we are architects of our own destiny. And this is the important thing for people to understand. So this is perhaps the most important lesson for humanity at the moment. Because if we know that we have to come here again, as we all do, unless we have any impending ascended masters amongst us this evening, we all have to come back again and again and again and take on physical form and learn whatever lesson or lessons we have selected for ourselves and tasks and jobs in a particular life. And if we know that we reap the rewards or the lack of rewards for what we do, then that is going to change people's behavior in a major way. If people are going to reincarnate to an incinerated planet or a planet which is so degraded that life is deeply unpleasant, then perhaps they will desist from some of the ruinous behaviors which they've indulged in for so long. If people know there is a continuity of existence, they're perhaps going to forsake some of the glamours that people cling to, particularly people who want to become celebrities, fame, fortune, status, power, influence, recognition, all these things which human beings have traditionally craved. These are just transitory glamours, as nice as they are at the time to have these things. They have no substance whatsoever, and they can't be taken with us. All we can take with us is that priceless knowledge and hopefully a little bit of wisdom which we acquire during each tenure in physical bodies on Earth. And so if humanity were to learn this lesson, if more members of humanity were to learn this lesson, that would immediately change human behavior. When I say immediately, within possibly a very few years. It wouldn't put an end to war, it wouldn't stop people starving. But the collective will of humanity is a very, very powerful thing. There is a collective consciousness which exists far beyond the internet. We're all in this together. We're all co-creators in the world that we exist. because we know that everything begins not on the physical plane, but on the inner planes. Things begin on the mental and get transmitted through the astral levels to become physically actualized on the material plane. And therefore, the way we think shapes the world. And if we change the way we think, we change the world. We can't change the world until we change the way that we think. And this knowledge that we're all on some kind of eternal journey, in which this life is just one of many. And therefore, in the grand scheme of things, although it's difficult to see that from where we are right now, but in the grand scheme of things, one particular life is of no more significance than another. Obviously, some incarnations do have more significance than others, but we have to play, excuse me, the long game here, because we are in the process of creating the world and also creating our future lives as well. And that gives us tremendous power. It gives us tremendous opportunity, but it also puts a burden of responsibility on us all. And that responsibility is to somehow try to control what we feel, what we say, what we think, and most importantly, what we do. And if we can gain some even small measure of control over these things, that in itself is a form of liberation. So just to conclude this, and I'd very much like to open it up for a brief discussion afterwards, if that's going to be possible. I'd like us just to think what the karmic things of this lying behind this might be. I have no particular answers, but there are things that have happened in the past which have brought us to this particular point at the moment. And so that's why it's an opportunity to talk about the cycle that we're in. We're after all making the transition, the painful transition from the age of Pisces, the age ruled by that sixth ray of devotion, which led to hierarchies and devotion to causes, political, religious. And we're moving into a much more synthetic age of Aquarius, which is governed by the seventh ray of ceremonial, order, and magic. This is a much more synthetic ray, when it will lead, we hope, to much greater degrees of cooperation and collaboration rather than competition. So as this pandemic continues to play out and continues to leave devastation in its wake, the best we can achieve from this is that it is some kind of wake-up call. It is a time to change our thinking about ourselves and about the world and the role that we play in it. I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Tim, for sharing with us your thoughts on this very serious situation we are living